Rain came down in a soft, persistent drizzle that wrapped the sleepy town of Blue Bridge in a gentle hush. Umbrellas bloomed like wildflowers along the sidewalks. But Noah Walker stood still at the edge of Maplewood Park, his coat unbuttoned, face tilted to the sky as if trying to remember the scent of this rain. He hadn't been back in nearly 8 years. Bluebridge hadn't changed much, but he had. His fingers tightened around the strap of his camera bag. The town where he had once loved and lost felt both achingly familiar and hauntingly distant. He wasn't here to chase ghosts, he told himself. He was here for the photography exhibit, to fill in for a last-minute cancellation at the Community Art Center. A job. Nothing more. The wind swept through the trees, rustling golden leaves to the ground, and that's when he saw her, across the street, in front of the little bookstore with the teal painted door. A woman stepped out, juggling a cup of coffee and a tote bag filled with books. Her hair chestnut waves half soaked from the mist clung to her cheeks. She looked up just as he raised his camera on instinct. And time betrayed him. It was her. Clara Bennett. Noah lowered the camera slowly. Breath caught in his throat. Clara paused mid-step, brows furrowing as if her heart too recognized something it hadn't expected to feel again. She blinked, looked again, and the to-go cup wobbled in her hand. Noah? Her voice was soft, tentative, but threaded with unmistakable disbelief. He forced a breath. Hi, Clara. The space between them was only a street wide, but the years made it feel like a chasm. Rain clung to their clothes, their lashes, and memories seeped in like water through an old roof. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been standing on a train platform, watching him leave with eyes full of unsaid things. What are you doing here? She asked, arms crossing tightly around her as if to shield herself. I could ask. You the same thing, he replied gently. I thought you moved to Seattle. I did. I came back last year, after Mom passed. I help run the bookstore now. She glanced at the camera hanging from his shoulder. Still chasing light and shadows? Noah offered a small smile. Always. Clara nodded, then tucked a damp strand behind her ear. For a moment, silence swirled between them again, thick, unspoken, and tender. You're soaked, he said, softly breaking the spell. Want to grab a coffee? She hesitated. I already have one. He chuckled, gesturing toward the now half-spilled drink in her hand. Looks like it wants a refill. A smile crept onto her lips, hesitant but warm. All right, just one coffee. Just one, but they both knew it was more than that. The moment had stretched like an echo of a forgotten melody. Rain still danced on the rooftops, the world continued to move. But for Noah and Clara, just for a heartbeat, time had truly stopped. Jasper sat across from her, fingers loosely wrapped around a steaming mug he hadn't taken a sip from. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and something sugary, but all he could focus on was the subtle rise and fall of Evelyn's chest as she avoided his gaze, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It had been 5 years. 5 years since that night in Boston, since they parted with words unsaid and wounds barely stitched. She looked the same and yet different, stronger maybe. Softer somehow. You look well, he finally said, voice low, tentative. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I run the bookstore now, she offered, nodding toward the window. It was my aunt's, remember? He did. She used to dream aloud of owning it one day, of reading to little kids on Sunday mornings and stocking the shelves with poetry and forgotten classics. Evelyn had always been drawn to things that needed to be remembered. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, but familiar. They watched raindrops race down the window pane in tandem, almost as if time itself was hesitating, holding its breath. So, what brings you back? She asked, finally looking at him. Her eyes, a warm hazel, held 1,000 questions. Jasper hesitated. A photo assignment, Blue Bridge in the fall. I didn't think. He paused, then chuckled awkwardly. I didn't know you'd still be here. Her lips parted slightly as if to respond, but she closed them again, processing the weight of his words. She had been here all along, planting roots in the same soil he'd abandoned. Sometimes, she murmured, people stay because they're still hoping something will return. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even sad. It was just honest. He looked down, his thumb brushing the rim of the mug. He didn't know what he'd expected. Closure? Forgiveness? Outside, the rain softened. The sky, once cloaked in gray, had started to break open with hints of gold. Evelyn stood first. I should get back, she said, adjusting her coat. He rose too, reflexively. Would you like to catch up sometime? He asked, his voice almost cracking under the weight of regret. She considered it for a beat too long, then nodded, maybe. And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the soft drizzle, leaving behind the scent of old pages, the echo of things left unsaid, and a man who had just realized he never stopped loving her. Jasper found himself walking into the bookstore the very next morning, not out of curiosity, but compulsion. The bell above the door chimed, and Evelyn looked up from the counter, visibly surprised. Back already? She asked, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Couldn't resist, he said lightly, but the truth was heavier. There was something magnetic about her presence, something unfinished that pulled him in like gravity. He roamed the aisles pretending to browse, yet his gaze always found her, and hers, once or twice, found his dot the days that followed unfolded. Like a slow dance, unexpected meetings, quiet coffees, walks under leaf-strewn sidewalks. Their conversations stretching deeper than pleasantries. They talked about poetry, photography, how the town had changed, and how some things never did. Each word, each glance, seemed to chip away at the wall they had once built. Evelyn began to laugh a little more when he was around, and Jasper started to feel like he could breathe again. One evening, he met her outside the bookstore just as she was locking up. "Walk with me?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They walked along the riverside where the streetlights reflected like stars in the water. A cool breeze whispered between them, but neither moved to close the gap. "Do you ever think about what we might have been if things had gone differently?" Jasper asked quietly. Evelyn looked away, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes. But I think about what we could still be too," she replied just as softly, that night, standing beneath a flickering lamppost, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Jasper leaned in but stopped inches from her lips. He saw it in her eyes, the same pull, the same fear. She touched his arm gently and whispered, "Not yet." He nodded, understanding. It wasn't rejection, it was restraint. It was the ache of timing that wasn't quite aligned, but hearts that were beginning to beat in rhythm once more. The next few weeks unfolded like pages in a book neither of them wanted to finish. Jasper started showing up early in the mornings, not just at the bookstore, but also at Evelyn's favorite coffee shop. Sometimes he'd leave a note on her table before she arrived, short lines of poetry, or lyrics from songs they used to share back when they were just two reckless hearts in love with the idea of forever. Evelyn pretended not to notice how much those notes meant to her, but she kept every single one, tucked between the pages of her journal dot as autumn deepened. They spent more time together at street festivals, in cozy libraries, in the quiet corner of the park where golden leaves rained like memories. It wasn't the kind of love that demanded to be declared. It was the kind that simply existed, quietly rebuilding what was once broken. Jasper noticed the way Evelyn would fall silent when they passed the old theater, and he never pressed her about it. She, in turn, understood when he grew distant near his father's old neighborhood. They were learning each other all over again, this time with softer edges and more patience. One late afternoon, they sat on the bookstore floor, sorting through a pile of donated novels. Evelyn held up a copy of a book Jasper had once read to her on rainy nights. "Remember this?" she asked. He smiled, not at the book, but at her. "I remember everything," he said. The way he said it made her chest tighten because it wasn't just about the book, it was about the nights, the promises, the dreams they had quietly shelved years ago. She looked away, blinking fast, but Jasper gently reached over, his fingers brushing hers. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. For a moment, the air between them went still. It was a fragile moment, suspended in all the things they were too afraid to say, but couldn't stop feeling. Evelyn didn't answer with words. She leaned her head gently on his shoulder, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. There were no declarations, no fireworks, just the quiet surrender. Two people inching closer not to what they once were, but to what they could still become. Just when it seemed like the past had loosened its grip, reality came crashing in. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn received an envelope, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Her father. Inside was a letter, cold and sharp, like his voice had always been. He knew she was back in town. He wanted a meeting. Her hands trembled as she read his words. The years had dulled many memories, but not the fear, not the sting of disappointment. Jasper noticed her withdrawal immediately, the way her smile faded too quickly, how she flinched when he mentioned family. She didn't tell him about the letter, not yet. Meanwhile, Jasper had battles of his own. The city had sent a final notice about the bookstore's lease rent was increasing, and his late payments were no longer tolerated. Saving the place was growing impossible. He had poured everything into it, not just money, but memories, meaning. Losing it felt like losing the last part of who he used to be. He hadn't told Evelyn. Not yet. They both clung to the illusion that things were finally falling into place, but their silences were growing heavier. One evening, while watching the autumn leaves fall outside the shop's foggy window, Jasper turned to her. "If you had to choose," he asked quietly, "would you stay and fight or leave before it gets messy?" Evelyn hesitated. "I think I've run too many times." But her voice lacked conviction, and he noticed. She noticed him noticing that the breaking point came days later. Jasper found the letter on her kitchen table. She hadn't meant to leave it out, but in her panic after receiving a second one, she'd forgotten. He read it, not all of it, but enough to know what it meant. When Evelyn returned, her face paled. "You read it?" she asked, voice fragile. He nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Because you have enough to carry, and because I was afraid you'd leave if you knew how broken it still is." His eyes softened with something between pain and understanding. "You should have let me decide that." That night, they didn't sleep. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was exhausted. They had both built a fragile peace, and now it was cracking. They weren't sure how to move forward. Only that stepping back hurt even more. The days that followed were quiet not with anger, but with weight. Evelyn began meeting her father. Again, reluctantly, in the corners of cafes where sunlight couldn't quite soften the tension between them. Their conversations were stilted, full of old wounds and words that never found breath when she was younger. He didn't apologize. He didn't know how. But there were pauses in his voice now, cracks that hinted at regret. Evelyn didn't forgive him, but she listened. And in listening, she began healing parts of herself that had long gone silent. Jasper, meanwhile, threw himself into saving the bookstore. He applied for community grants, hosted late-night poetry readings, and even let a local school use the space for storytelling nights. The town rallied behind him, the way people often do when they see someone trying to hold on to something beautiful. But the deadline was closing in, and he knew effort alone might not be enough. One evening, Evelyn showed up with a small envelope in hand. "It's not much," she said, placing it gently on the counter. Inside was a check for savings. "I want to help. You gave me something when I returned that I didn't even know I was looking for. Let me give something back." Jasper didn't argue. He just reached for her hand, grateful in more ways than words could cover. That night, they sat under the bookstore's skylight as rain tapped the glass above them. Jasper finally told her the truth, the moments he almost gave up, the fear of losing not just the store, but her. Evelyn leaned in, forehead against his. "We won't lose each other," she whispered. "Not again." Their lives weren't fixed, not completely, but something had shifted. Their love, once hesitant and cautious, was now quiet but certain. Like the warmth that stays after the fire burns out. Refusing to leave, spring crept into the town slowly, unfolding its petals along the sidewalks and bookstore windows. The for sale sign was finally taken down, and in its place, a new banner fluttered, the chapter house, where stories begin again. Jasper and Evelyn stood outside the door, their fingers linked, watching as children rushed in for a weekend storytelling session. The community had come together in ways Jasper never expected. With Evelyn's help and her belief in him, they'd managed not only to save the store, but to give it a new heartbeat. Her relationship with her father remained fragile but present, like a rebuilt bridge with visible cracks yet sturdy footing. She didn't pretend the past hadn't happened, but she had stopped letting it write her future. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single act. It was 1,000 small choices made daily with trembling grace. That evening, the bookstore hosted its grand reopening. Fairy lights draped across shelves, poetry danced in the air, and Evelyn wore the same blue dress she'd worn the day she walked back into Jasper's life. As he stepped up to the little stage to thank everyone, he looked straight at her, his voice trembling just slightly. "I thought I lost the best chapter of my life. But turns out she came back and brought a whole new story with her." Later, as they locked up, Evelyn whispered, "What now?" Jasper smiled, brushing her hair from her face. "Now, we begin again." She laughed softly, heart full. "Sounds like something out of a book." He kissed her forehead, pulling her close. "No, this time it's real life, ours." And as the last light in the shop dimmed and their shadows intertwined, time didn't stop, it simply moved forward with them in it together.